At the end of every interview that we have for teacher candidates, we will say, "What questions do you have for us?" And they will always ask, "Well, what kind of support can I expect?" And we will always say, "Well, don't worry, we'll give you a mentor." But it's not real mentorship. I mean, it's support with the difficult kid or the field trip form or the grade card, but it isn't coaching. That's where partners like EdConnective step in. They provide observation and feedback with practice. That's real coaching. Their mission is to ensure that every student thrives by facilitating exceptional educator growth. So whether it's science of reading, whether it's leadership development, whether you're trying to build the best recruitment and retention efforts, check out edconnective.com. Today on An Imperfect Leader, my guest is Dr. Jim Van Allan. Now, Jim is the co-author of The Energy Bus for Schools, a companion to The Energy Bus, a bestseller by his co-author, John Gordon. And that has sold, I think, more than 3 million copies. Wow. In addition to being the president of the Energy Bus for Schools program, Jim is a professor of communication studies at Kaiser University. He holds a PhD in educational leadership, where he studied the impact of the Energy Bus for Schools curriculum on a model school. Jim, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
It is great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm thrilled to have you, and thank you so much for joining us on An Imperfect Leader. Now, I wonder if we could start our conversation by talking about this book, The Energy Bus for Schools, and the program in general. And the reason why I want to start there is because, the book really comes at a perfect time, post-pandemic and pre-election. And never has there been a more important time to talk about themes that I have seen in the book: thriving during times of change, or communication to strengthen relationships. Never has it been more important for educators to rediscover the joy and excitement of being in education, especially at a time of things like record chronic absenteeism for kids and also for teachers. So, and actually there's an entire issue in AASA's School Administrator magazine addressed exactly to teacher recruitment and retention in the month of May. So my question for you: what have you learned about thriving during times of change and rediscovering joy and excitement?
What I would say to that is, if there's a few certainties in life, right? Death and taxes, you always hear that. I'll add one more for educators, and that's change, right? There's never going to be a school year where there hasn't been some form of change coming down the pipeline, or negativity brewing in faculty. It just seems to be a way of life, right? The education system changes constantly. There's a lot of different bosses. Anytime you have a situation and you have a lot of different variables, and those variables are combustible at times. We're talking about, curriculum, parents, students, heck, even weather, right? Depending on where you are, that's going to breed a lot of change in our schools. So what's funny about what John and I wrote this book, the follow-up to The Energy Bus, is that we realized from talking to a lot of principals and superintendents out there that, even pre-COVID, there were issues. We'd like to look at COVID as sort of a BC 80 type thing, right, in our society. But I was still getting speaking requests. John was still getting speaking requests. We were still getting a ton of people wanting to read John Gordon's books because they were dealing with negativity in their workplace and in their schools. And I would say one of the top things I've learned from my dealing with schools and leaders and change is that they truly have to go back to their purpose. They have to go back to ground zero and go back to step one and say, why did I get into this in the first place? And I've even had some of those moments the last month or so, because life is very busy. Leading this Energy Bus for Schools initiative, you can get caught in the weeds. That the logistics of running a day-to-day operation can be very busy and take you away from your focus. And that's to love these kids, right? Love these students, serve their families, impact teachers. So it's almost like you need a jolt back into reality sometimes if you're a school leader, to say, okay, if I can strip through all the paperwork and complaints and change, why did I even want to get into my principalship or my AP-ship or wherever I am? And I want everybody to go back to square one, go back to ground zero, and be like, okay, you know what? I need to open my eyes a little bit more. I need to look for the good sometimes. I have to search for it. Even if you have to scratch and claw Indiana Jones style through whatever it is you got to get through to find that good of that day or that week. It's so essential to develop a positive mindset, which is paramount to overcoming change and adversity.
It's interesting because I think what happens, particularly you think about, okay, so you and I are having this conversation as the summer months are approaching, and that's typically when leaders will take a step back and look at what went well and what didn't go so well, and also a time to begin thinking about what they'd like to change. I think there's almost this compulsion that they feel that every year there has to be sort of this big change. And what I have learned from listening to you now, from reading about the work that you do, is that it isn't necessarily you have to make these profound, sort of monumental changes, but rather really approach this from, sometimes we call it like an appreciative lens. What was going well and how do we get more of that? And how do I appreciate the people that I work with, as opposed to look at things through the sort of deficit lens of what isn't going well? Well, the mountain of paperwork, the parent feedback, the legislation that sort of compels schools to maybe have to do things differently. And we get so bogged down in that we forget that there really is a ton of really good things happening in our buildings and with our kids. And it seems like what you're asking us to do is to really sort of highlight and spotlight the good and then amplify that some more.
Well, and saying that, yes, it does. And that's where we should start, right? And that's the mindset shift, the paradigm shift that's needed, I believe, in our school leadership in this country now. It doesn't mean you ignore the problems, right? And ignore the issues that need to be had. Of course, you're a leader, you can do it all. But let's, as we're reflective at the end of the year here, let's focus on the good things. And that's something that I'm going to be taking into my messages to schools around the country this summer. I'll let you in a little secret. I'm going to try to get a few, like 3 or 4 stories. If I have to go do a keynote for a district of teachers who did an amazing job, and I want to recognize them in the keynote. I want to spotlight them, right? And I'm not going to embarrass them, have them come up on stage and do that. But I want to make sure that I set the tone right. It means I got to put in the work to find the story, to build it into the keynote, to stop, to integrate it. But I think that sets the tone in saying, what are we choosing to think about? What are we choosing to look at? What are we choosing to focus on? And as you said, amplify that. And then I believe that's going to help you in those areas of struggle, because every school, right, has some type of deficit somewhere that they can try to make up. But in reality, I'm not a big fan of, like you said, just going in and knocking down a wall if you don't have to, right? Making that massive change if you don't absolutely have to, especially if no one has asked for it. Like, think about this from a leadership perspective. That's what I'm trying to help leaders to do now too. Have you checked in with your staff on the changes they feel need to happen, right? You can pitch them a few things, but if 60 faces look at you with this look of like, huh? Like, maybe you need to do a little bit more small group straw poll and collaborative nature to figure out, okay, all right, am I just top downing this thing, or have I actually, collaborated to figure out, maybe I don't need to revamp our behavioral system. Maybe I don't need to revamp how we reward students or our entire lunch process. Make sure there's a legitimate reason to make those changes. Teachers have to deal with enough of it.
Yeah. Rule number 1 is make decisions with the people most impacted. And I can totally relate to colleagues who have walked in front of their entire faculties and said exactly that. We're going to change the way we do our lunch schedule. Whoa, that is...
Why, right?
Right.
Is there a life or death? Like, what's the
Yeah.
Unless they can explain unless it's like, hey, because you can't run everything by your faculty. And that's what you can't run every single little decision by them. And there are some times where you need to be collaborative, and others times where you need to just legislate executively, right? Where it's kind of an executive decision, but as long as you are explaining the why and purpose, and you
if they're anchored in the sort of the ideals of the school that have been established by the faculty. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And in fact, let's explore collaboration a little bit. So this past year, I wrote a book called An Imperfect Leader. And then in that book and in the leadership model that I use to advise others, there's a dimension. It's called nested patterns. And it's the muscle of an organization's work. It really gets to the question of how do we want to be together? And inside that dimension, there are 2 terms: high levels of collaboration and shared leadership. And in preparing for our conversation, I read more about how you speak to the tenets of building a connected team, developing a positive mindset, removing negativity that sabotages morale and culture. And I think when you strip away the hierarchy and you share leadership, really great things can happen. And so would you talk a little bit about the advice that you have for leaders who find themselves in sort of that antiquated model of leadership when they're like so desperate to control every decision?
Well, it's not 1984 anymore, right? We don't have the principle from the Breakfast Club. We don't have to worry about the Back to the Future principle.
You're making an Orwell reference. So, wow, an Animal Farm kind of thing. Because I mean, there's hierarchy involved there, I guess.
You're smarter than I am. I should have made that reference, but we're not these 80s principles who Ferris Bueller, where they're trying to control everything with this tight fist. Doesn't exist anymore. And you know what? I like that. I think there's time and place for needing to, as I call it, like legislate and make a decision and lead. There's time and place, but I am such a fan of a situational collaborative approach. And when you have experience, you can walk that line and be like, okay, I know when I need to involve people, and I know when I need to just get with my team and decide perhaps what's best for school. When you can walk that line, you'll show your staff and faculty that, okay, this is a leader who does care, who will come to us, but is also ready to make the tough decisions when they have to. So, but it's from a collaborative approach. John wrote the original book called The Energy Bus. John and I co-wrote the follow-up, The Energy Bus for Schools. So if you think about the whole concept of a bus, right? We're encouraging people to come together under this collective belief mindset on campus. We want to unify beliefs. We want one agenda on campus. We want a leader that is believing that leadership is a transfer of belief. So we want everyone to have this collective unified mindset that we all contribute to creating a positive campus culture. Every person on campus, I'm talking about front office, cafeteria, custodian, staff, paraprofessional, you name them, right? Everybody plays a role. So if you're a leader and you truly do believe that, why are we not having more of a collaborative approach to developing a vision, setting that vision, executing the vision? Why are we not going to these folks more? Why are we not having more small group meetings instead of just large faculty meetings? I think large faculty meetings are an antiquated form of communication if done all the time. I'm of the approach of one-on-ones and small groups. So get your third grade team together. Heck, put a first, third, fourth, fifth teacher together and talk that way. This is something I say a lot too. It's a leader's job. You hire the right people and then you manage them. Your job, number one job, is relationships.
It's interesting. You speak to sort of the antiquated model. And I think that an antiquated model that schools sort of are so anchored to is this idea of reform. That school reform truly is like, it's about control. And what you're speaking to, so having alignment first through fifth grade by having teachers at different levels meeting and talking to each other and seeing their experiences, or having small group meetings as opposed to every month doing this large scale faculty meeting where, they're fine for getting information out to a large group so everybody hears at the same time. They're fine for, or really appropriate for, celebrating the good work that teams are doing. If you're talking about actually making meaningful progress, it doesn't happen in this whole sort of, town hall type meetings. That's really not the purpose for this. So I really agree with that. And so really you're speaking to transformation because that's about connection. That's about collaboration. And so I wonder, what has been your approach when you encounter a system? I know you give speeches, but I know you also coach teams. And so what happens when you're really encountering a system that really is about coaching for compliance as opposed to peer coaching and thinking that a one-size-fits-all approach is going to create these positive results when I imagine your experience has been that's not the case?
When I had a school once that was like that, where things were very top down. They were part of a district that was very much like that. And unfortunately, the school that I went and spoke to, when I did a pre-event call with them, they said that they'd never had a vision, a mission ever. Like it had been, a decade plus, and they were lost. They had no identity, and they were used to leadership that was uber controlling of most aspects of the school. if they did have a vision, it was slapped on the wall and then the dust would form on it and you would never see it. It just wasn't reinforced, and it was very hierarchical. It was very much like that. So obviously this person, as they do, moves on either on their own or they're asked, here's the door, right? And they brought me in because they're like, we need an identity. And you should have seen these folks. This was in Denver, Colorado. And I was like a mastermind in there with Professor. Like I had flip charts all over the walls, and we had stations, and this group was working on this part of the mission. This group was working on this part of the vision. They would get up and do station work and walk around and put a check next to the vision statements they liked. They were changing the wording around. It was really powerful. And when we were done, there was like a sense of relief among the faculty. Finally, they got to have a voice, right? They got to have a voice, they got to have a vision, and now they have an idea, and they're flourishing. And I followed up with the new principal, later on that year, and they just said that they do a lot more small group, they do a lot more one-on-ones now, and what they're doing most importantly, they're talking about their vision in an ongoing fashion. They're making sure everything is aligned to it. Hiring, values, policy that they make, and that creates collaboration. Now, everybody on that campus, is what I tell people, everybody on that campus now has a role in making the school a success. And that's how you're going to get people to be really engaged in the process. And that will retain them, right? That'll retain them.
I think you're right. It is about retaining people when they feel, not just feel, but they actually are a part of establishing that compelling purpose that then is seen almost as like an organism, a living organism that has the opportunity to change or maintain, right? Because, there's value in maintaining for a period of time so that everybody knows, to use your metaphor of the bus, that the bus is moving in that same direction and isn't going to constantly be changing lanes, then getting on a frontage road that, you don't know where it's going, following all those kinds of detours and things like that. And boy, I could have so much fun with your metaphor. But
yes, you can. And schools do, trust me.
I bet they do. And and on those school buses, there are no seatbelts. So, as long as it comes to a nice, right, appropriate stop, they can go change seats.
Exactly right.
I love it. So would you do me a favor? What does the term an imperfect leader mean to you?
I love that question. I know a lot of school leaders and especially principals, they struggle with, I think, trying to be perfect and trying to have every detail covered and every ball in the air is juggled appropriately. And now that I've taken on more of a leadership role in the Energy Bus for Schools, I used to be a trainer in the program. Now I'm president and leading it. I have felt the weight of details, right? And trying to be perfect at my job for John Gordon, who I've known for 18 years. He's the master, and living up to the expectations. And when you try to be perfect, when you try to have every ball in the air accounted for, when you try to have every detail accounted for, you're just weighed down by it. When I got to a point where I was like, okay, I just kind of put my hands up and I said, you know what? Taking a deep breath, and I'm going to ask for help. I'm going to ask for help. I'm going to restructure. I'm going to get organized. But the asking for help part was the number one thing that I learned. And I think your principals and your leaders can learn too about what it means to be an imperfect leader, because we are not meant to be perfect. Okay. We are not meant to be 100%. That's why you're part of a team. So I would say to them, an imperfect leader will surround themselves with amazing help, but will also always have the best interest of the students and the mission of the school at heart. So an imperfect leader should definitely be asking for help and should be not afraid to be vulnerable and human, because that's what people most of all want out of you, to know that you're a human being, you care, and you're growing just like I am.
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of an imperfect leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. My guest today is Jim Van Allan, an author, a speaker, and president of the Energy Bus for Schools program. And in this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they made, and then we discuss it. So here we go. What happened, Jim?
So I was thinking about this answer, and I know you maybe have a lot of guests that are going to share a school-specific example, which is great. I love that. But I wanted to go a different direction. That's normally what I do, so sorry. But it is very relatable. I'll relate it back to schools for sure. But as you all figured out, I do a lot of speaking training for schools and districts across the country. So I had a speaking engagement once at Jackson Elementary School. That's the name of it, right? So I Google it, we talk. I talked to the principal twice, and it's in Wyoming. And I see, okay, it's in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. There's a Jackson Elementary there. Great. We can go in the night before. Yellowstone Park is 50 miles north of me. I can do the parks. It'll be beautiful. I'm a mile from the school. I show up from the school the next day, ready for my training, literally walk in the school. There's nobody there. I'm like, this is a little strange. Open up the library, and chairs are all stacked, and it's definitely an off day. And a lady approaches me and wondering, who is this person? And introduces herself as the principal. And I'm like, this is okay. All right. Interesting. I've been talking to a man the last 3 months. So now I'm like, okay, this is okay. Here we go. And she had no clue what I was talking about. And I said, is there another Jackson Elementary nearby? She wasn't very helpful. I will tell you that. So I go to my car.
Well, you're some guy who's walking in her building. You're like, hey, Energy Bus for Schools. I'm here.
I know. For sure. You're exactly right. I was
stranger danger.
I wasn't dressed in my cutoff. I was in my suit and tie and stuff, but nonetheless, it was on me to figure it out. So I go to my car, and it's 30 degrees out, and I looked on my map. I'm like, all right, maybe there's one in the next county over, but you realize it's Wyoming. The next county over is 3 hours away. So I looked, and I was literally 3 hours in the wrong direction. I was supposed to be in Riverton, and I was in Jackson Hole. So I panic, and you have that moment where you think you're going great. I'm on time. I'm perfect. My schedule is set. And all of a sudden, boom. So I called the principal, and he couldn't have been nicer and more accommodating. I said, all right, let's do it. Let's set up a full day. Let's do a half day. I said, I can get there by 11. We can do 11 to 3. And he said, that's fine, but just be careful getting over the mountains. And realize this, I'm from Florida. I've lived in Florida my entire life. Okay, we don't have mountains. I don't know how to drive in snow. So as I'm driving through the Grand Tetons to get down to go across Wyoming, I'm having this moment where it's a make or break moment, right? I'm clutching the steering wheel, and I'm about to panic and just get angry and guilty. I'm like, this is going to be a long drive. Then I got to go and talk about positivity, right? I better get my mindset together fast. So I put on some AC/DC and classic rock and Bon Jovi and Def Leppard and all those hair bands that you all love or hate. And you know what? That's got me over that mountain. And I got to the school, and they were so nice and so wonderful. Had an amazing workshop. And I use this as an example when I talk down to leaders and school principals and everybody. And I say, listen, you're going to have a plan. You're going to have a vision. You're going to be so excited. You're going to have a nice school year. You're going to put in all this work. You're going to pre-plan. You're going to get your staff in order. You're going to set your vision. You're going to have this amazing theme plan for the year. Then all of a sudden, something is going to throw it all out of whack, or part of it out of whack. And you're either going to panic, or you're going to rise up from it, and you have a solution. And that's what I did in that drive. I didn't panic. I owned up to it, but I made the best of the drive. I tried to turn my mindset into something great. And you know what? It ended up being an amazing drive over. And then unfortunately, I had to drive, all the way back to get to my hotel. So I did 6 hours of driving that day. And in the end, I've told people that story a lot, because I want them to know that don't go in with a hard plan. All right. If you're a leader, go in with the direction, anticipate the change that may come, anticipate the negativity, right? What did I say earlier? Changing negativity, absolutes in education sometimes, but they don't have to weigh you down. They don't have to derail you. If you have that positive mindset, you will be a solution-oriented leader. You'll be a collaborative leader, and you'll be better because of it.
So typically I ask the question about what got overlooked. I think it's fairly clear. If I asked you that question, everybody would be like, are you listening to the story? What got overlooked is you went to the wrong town. But I would say that if I don't ask you the question, I may not reveal some possible other areas that you learned as you went through this experience. So what did get overlooked?
Well, so obviously, and I have not made this mistake since then. I think I got a little lazy. I didn't quite, even though I talked to the principal, I didn't have the exact address where I was supposed to be. And it was a major detail that I just missed completely. And I think, stuff like that, I've now since corrected that. I have a pre-event form that goes out and I'm triple confirming everything. And I feel better because of that, and obviously more professional. So I think I just kind of took it for granted a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it seems like a good lesson in that in terms of what got overlooked are those small things, right? The small details sometimes can be the things that undermine your goals. And so as leaders in schools, we think it's, I'll just make this quick decision about when the band concert's going to be. And it's just a small little thing based on a calendar, and it throws everybody off. And then when you're trying to do the big things, you've damaged some relationships. So that's actually the next question is about what did you learn about relationships, or what new relationships were formed because of this?
I learned a lot about this principal who was very accommodating and full of grace and patient, and didn't berate and didn't demand money back. It was just really a sweet person to be able to be like, okay, I get it. Welcome me into the school. And it definitely taught me about grace. People are always making mistakes, right? In life, people you run into around town or so. But in context of a school, there's always going to be somebody making mistakes here or there. And if they own up to it, if nothing's malicious, nothing like that, we can show grace to people and extend a hand and extend a smile. And that's going to go such a long way in helping them to be back into the fold, included in what's going on, and just getting past whatever needs to get past. Because, that's a big thing that I learned from that experience.
Well, I'd also like to bring us back to segment 1, where you talked about small group and one-on-one and the value and the importance of doing that. Could you imagine if you had only been emailing with this principal over the months before you got there? He may have had a very different response to, I'm 3 hours away, as opposed to you had all these one-on-one calls. You got to know each other a little bit, know each other's goal, and have that sort of, relationship that began to form. And so when, in fact, you needed to draw from that well of grace, it was easy to offer because you had done the work of getting to know each other. Does that make sense? I mean, it just seems like as you're talking about the value. Yeah.
No, that makes total sense for sure. I absolutely get that.
What frustrated you?
I think what frustrated me the most is, and it's funny, like this is the Imperfect Leader podcast here, and you've written the book on it. What frustrated me the most was that I wasn't, I pride myself on being getting those details down, right? And being professional. And I felt embarrassed. I felt guilty. I was really embarrassed, though, to be honest with you. Like that's such a mistake that really can't happen. What if I was in the wrong state, right? Or right.
Like, what if in Jackson, Mississippi? Exactly.
What if? So I want to be a professional, and I want to be credible, and just, you kind of had to walk into school, and I had to address it with everybody. Like I had to just, make myself the goat for a second, but then we got past. We had a little laugh. We got past it, and we, like I said, it was a great workshop. I think that was the biggest. And maybe a lot of your listeners, your leaders, fear the embarrassment, fear, losing credibility. And you know what? If you're willing to be a little bit vulnerable and laugh at your mistakes sometimes and just learn from it and just be human, people are going to forgive and love you more than you think.
I love that. I think that truly is, when we ask in the end what was something that was good that came out of the situation, a real reminder on the value and the importance of being vulnerable and being human.
Well, I've been able to share this story now the last 5 years, and it's And I try to vary some of my storytelling when I do keynotes, but there's a few that I keep in that are just really powerful because, so I think things like that, sometimes in my world, in my beliefs, that I think it was supposed to happen. So I could share this story a lot with teachers and principals all over the country the last 5 years. So they realized that, number one, right, is that be vulnerable, don't be married to your plan, right? Show grace. So I think that taught me a lot that I could then share with others. So I'm almost thankful.
So leaders out there, if you're supposed to be heading somewhere, go in the opposite direction. Just drive 3 hours. It'll be fun. Great story.
Go and teach yourself a lesson that way, right?
Exactly. What advice would you give to an aspiring leader?
So I saw this and I really wanted to, think about this. You probably have a lot of aspiring leaders listening to this podcast. And I would say, to be honest, leadership and leadership roles are not for everyone. Okay. They're not, right? Not everybody's meant to be in a leadership position in some form or fashion, whether it's in a school or somewhere else, right? It's not for everyone. So really do some reflection and know why you want to get into that leadership position. Make sure it's not because of the paycheck. I know a lot of people who have money who are miserable. Make sure that you really have a heart to serve, because you are going to serve like never before. Like, you are going to be wearing so many hats every single day. You're going to have to go and open up doors at Carline and do the announcements and run the pep rally maybe and clean up at the cafeteria and give a kid a hug who just fell on the playground, or know students' names in high school, middle school, and be able to say something about them. You have to really be able to stretch yourself thin. And that's going to take a lot out of you, right? Over the years, it's going to take a lot out of you. So make sure that you feel that your heart is in the right spot, because I'll tell you what, we need you. We need good leaders, but I want to make sure we have the right ones in place who are ready for the challenge, who are servant leaders at heart, and they are ready to surround themselves with great people that are going to lift them up when they need it and recharge them when they need it the most.
My guest today was Dr. Jim Van Allen, author, speaker, and president of the Energy Bus for Schools program. And Jim, I just want to thank you so much for being a part of this program. I love this reminder that, yes, we all have plans. And yes, there are going to be times where, metaphorically, we're going to have to be forced to drive 3 hours in a different direction, white-knuckled over peaks and through valleys. And then sometimes you actually have to do that. But truly, that we are a team, we work together as a team, and we are more successful when we collaborate, and we do it when we enjoy the people we're with, and we're willing to be vulnerable and accept the fact that, as humans, we get more done when we do it together. So thank you so much for your time. I really am grateful for it.
Thank you for having me. I loved it. Thank you so much.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print-inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. And I'm proud to be an imperfect leader. I'm Peter Stiepelman. Please join me next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader. Leadership in After Action. Imperfect leaders. Are you facing challenges filling open speech-language pathologist positions within your district? It's kind of a silly question because I know you are. Empath Speech understands the critical need for qualified professionals in your schools. They recognize that communication lies at the heart of academic success, and that's why they're dedicated to helping you bridge the gap by offering expert therapists and innovative telehealth solutions. Don't let open positions hinder your students' success. Partner with Empath Speech today and ensure every child in your district has access to the speech therapy they deserve. Empath Speech, EMPAT Speech.com. Empowering students, empowering schools.